right, welcome to our TMN Tuesday event for our final in our 2022 webinar series on the second Tuesdays of every month in 2022. But don't fear, these are not going away, and we've got some information on the 2023 TMN Tuesday event starting in January. So as always with our TMN Tuesday events, we like to start off with a little bit of a tech check to make sure that you are able to participate as intended for these webinars. And so if this is your first TMN Tuesday event, welcome. As an attendee for this webinar event, do not worry that you cannot unmute or share your video. That is on purpose. Many times with our events we have over 1,000 attendees, and we want to make sure that we are giving all of our attention and access for the content to our presenters. And so your access as an attendee to be able to interact with our presenter is going to be our chat room, and I'll show you how to use that here in just a second. But if you are now saying, hey, wait, I'm seeing Mary Pearl use her hands and I'm seeing her talk, but I can't hear it. You can't hear me to tell you to adjust your audio connections, but hopefully you can at least see the screen and are able to very quickly adjust your audio. Make sure your your computer speakers are unmuted or plugged in, turned on, and all of that. So as always, you can't hear me tell you to do that if you're having issues hearing, but hopefully you can see the screen at this point. All right, one more second for that one. All right, so the main, as I mentioned, as an attendee for our TMN Tuesday webinars, the main interaction function with from our attendees to our panelists and our speakers is going to be through our chat. Our chat box is open right now. I'm seeing people introduce themselves and their counties or their chapters that they're joining from. There's a little bit of discussion about some of the weather systems that we're going through the DFW area this morning. So that chat is main for on-topic discussion during the presentation with full and clear sentences, so that our panelists and our speakers can understand the question that you're asking and then answer that question that you intend for us to answer. And also to make sure that you are talking to everyone, please make sure that your chat setting is set to everyone. That'll help to engage the whole audience in the room with this chat function today. There's Mr. Taylor. Good morning. I'm getting us started with some of our background tech check, and then we'll kick it off to you in here in just a second. All right, so a little bit more about our TMN Tuesdays. This month is our last in our 2022 series, but again, fear not, they are not going away in 2023. As always, our webinar etiquette for our TMN Tuesdays is outlined on this screen. We will have this screen on every one of our TMN Tuesdays to make sure that all of our attendees are on the same page as we put on these types of events, talking about how attendees cannot unmute or share videos. Chat function is for on-topic discussion only. The amount of time that this session counts for and how it can count for AT as well. But as always, we have our website with more information, an FAQ page, WebEx guide, and so on. All right, and if you didn't notice, but now you're just seeing the little red dot up in the top of your screen, does mean that this webinar is being recorded today. So if you miss something, have to step out, or if you're listening to this as a recording, this is going to be on our website, if not by the end of the day today, first thing tomorrow morning. And Michelle will drop the link for our TMN Tuesday page in the chat for y'all to be able to find that. All right, so getting to the good stuff. Our TMN Tuesday series started in 2021, and we've now completed at the end of this hour, we'll have completed 2 whole years of this seminar series. As a reminder, our TMN Tuesdays were kicked off as the second Tuesday, are held as the second Tuesday of the month, and offered as advanced training credit for all of our Master Naturalists, and non-Master Naturalists are welcome to join as well. They are always free, they are open to the public, and these recordings will be posted, if not the afternoon of the following day, hopefully, but at least by the following day. Our 2022 Team and Tuesday series is coming to a wrap, as mentioned, and that can only be counted for advanced training within the calendar year of 2022. So as you listen to Kenny today or are watching this recording, please make sure that you're logging that advanced training within the calendar year of 2022. Our 2023 series starts January 10th. And then this unique event today is both an overlap of TMN Tuesday and chapter presidents meetings, and those chapter presidents meetings will also be relaunching in 23 with dates to be emailed at a future date. So I'll leave this on the screen for just a second here so y'all can take a quick screenshot, but Michelle has also dropped the link in the chat. Our 2023 series dates have been selected. They are on the website, they're posted, we're putting them out there as much as we possibly can. And you can actually register for all of our 2023 events with one click this year, something new that we're trying with our webinar series functionality on WebEx. So these are all of the dates for our 2023 series. One of the dates that you will notice on here is the October 3rd date is not the second Tuesday of the month. That is the only one that had to be adjusted to be the first Tuesday of the month. And then we have two joint presidents meetings in July and in December. And so we'll talk about those as we get closer to those events. And so that link has been shared. You can register now for all of next year's events with that TMN Tuesday link that is now live on our website. Michelle, did I miss anything? Getting going? Okay, thank you for doing the troubleshooting on the back end, and I'm going to hand it over to Michelle to introduce our topic and our speaker for today.
All right, well, many of you have met our speaker today before. He was a presenter at our July meeting, our joint meeting, and talked about a related topic for boards at that time. And we asked Kenny to come back again in December to talk about kind of these transitioning times for boards and our master naturalists and our chapter leadership in the new year, and how members and boards, our chapter boards alike, can prepare and prepare for that successional leadership, and prepare and plan for the upcoming year and the next 5 years. As you know, 2023, we're moving into our 25th anniversary year for the Master Naturalist program. So we want to provide this training for both members and our chapters alike, chapter leadership alike, to help move us forward and thrust us forward into the next 25 years of the Master Naturalist program. And that all happens with great planning, communication, and leadership from at all levels of your chapter and our membership. So I'm going to Kenny's ready to present, so I am going to hand it over to Kenny this morning. Kenneth Anderson Taylor with the Center for Nonprofits and Philanthropy from the Texas A&M Bush School. So welcome, Kenny, welcome back, and welcome again.
Uh-oh, we don't have audio on you yet, Kenny. You will have to go to...
About now?
Yeah, now we've got you.
Okay, I wasn't sure if you needed to turn that on for me, but thanks to both of you all for having me back, Michelle and Mary Pearl, and for all those attending. Good to be back with you. If we visited last time, or if you were able to attend my presentation last time, but I'm really happy to be here today. And I think today's session will build off of what we discussed last time, as Michelle just referenced. So without any further, just let's see here. I don't need to get into a bunch of detail about our center, but we always like to just throw up and make sure that any folks that we interact with are aware that our mission at the center here at Texas A&M University is to support the nonprofit sector and the philanthropic sector here in the state of Texas and beyond, of course. And our primary activities include research, professional outreach, and engaged learning. And so my specific role, as the title slide kind of alluded to, is professional outreach. So opportunities like this to visit with you and to go through some of our educational offerings is always nice. This, of course, is customized, and Mary Pearl has certainly interacted and engaged with some of our professional offerings here at the school. So it's always a welcome opportunity to return the favor and visit with groups for folks that support us. So again, we really appreciate that as well too. So let's see. As far as the agenda, I think we have about an hour. I'll try to certainly save some time for questions if we can. But we do have a lot of information to try to get through. And I think when we were trying to conceptualize what today would look like, it was to focus a bit on board recruitment, a bit on leadership responsibilities. So what might a board retreat and what might, I guess when I use long-term planning there, what might strategic planning look like for you all's organization? And then to address the issue of how do we be, or how can we, be more flexible as leaders. And so one approach that I thought about was a situational leadership approach. And I'm sure many of you all have heard of that theory. And so we'll talk about that a little bit more specifically as just, one opportunity to think about how to be flexible as leaders. And then the last piece we would go into, or that I'll go into today, has to do with how do we think about succession planning. I guess, before we get into it, one thing that I should absolutely mention is most of what I'm going to present to you today really has to do with a more traditional nonprofit operation where there's a board of directors who is supervising an executive director or a CEO of a nonprofit organization, who is then responsible for all of the internal operations of a nonprofit organization. So what I would ask you to do is just be aware that the information that I'm going to present to you today might be a little different with you all being all volunteers. And so again, what I would challenge and ask you to do is the takeaways of the information within is just think about how that might apply in your volunteer setting. And of course, and putting this together, I tried to keep that in mind as well too. And so throughout the presentation, I'll try to make sure to come back to how that might work in a volunteer setting. I think the presentation is built like that, but in case I miss something, just for you all to be aware that traditionally that's who we mostly work with, but to recognize that you all are all volunteers, and the hope that the information that we present today is relevant for you. So let's get into talking about board recruitment a bit. Let's see here. So just in terms of, all of you all volunteers, I know that you're structured as boards, and just back to when we traditionally think about what does board recruitment mean and what are our objectives when we think about board recruitment. So one thing that I'll start off with before we kind of get into some of the details is this is really a tough role for board members. And to be quite honest with you, it's a little frustrating because the research consistently says if we can get our boards right, then whatever performance that you all are looking for, whatever you hope to accomplish as a goal, tends to be much easier. And nonprofit organizations tend to get there if they can get the recruitment piece at least somewhat right in terms of who's on your board in your respective areas. So I guess generally speaking, the objectives are to identify folks who are capable leaders that can fulfill these substantive leadership needs. So, what are the needs that you truly have at your respective chapters? And then to identify people that can help you work toward those goals that you have. Again, I'll use a more traditional example, but some of you all may remember I didn't get a chance to really introduce myself. I didn't want to take a lot of time doing that, but I had almost a 20-year career at nonprofit, at a variety of nonprofit organizations, but 12 of those years was spent with big brothers, big sisters. And the times that I personally spent reporting to a board and partnering with the board of directors, there were things that I reflect on that we were trying to identify that were vital to our organization at the time. And that was to build relationships with school districts, to make sure that we had a good mix of volunteers to serve the number of kids that we needed to serve. I remember when we ran out of space and we needed a new building. So we wanted to make sure that we had someone who was a real estate professional. We know that, again, I'm talking a little bit more traditional, but we always needed legal help on our board. So we always wanted to make sure that we had someone who was a lawyer. So however that relates to you is just to make sure that we think about what are our needs at our organization and are we recruiting people along those ways. When we do so, we can build more systems that ensure reliable and successful recruitment and selection procedures. This is going to sound really formal, and again, I personally believe we need more of that. And one reason we need more of that, because I'm just going to paraphrase, but we know that many nonprofit organizations, I'm not sure exactly what this means for you, but many nonprofit organizations, the way people end up on boards, are they're usually friends of people that are already on those boards. So they're neighbors or they're employees. And when we do that, they tend to look the same, have the same dynamics, and it doesn't really address those real needs that an organization might have to advance an organization's mission forward. Other objectives is just to engage, I think I've already alluded to it, but to engage those volunteers in critical decision making for the organization and for the community. And one of the things that we found, again, and I'll just say this without knowing some of those details that you might be going through, is when we recruit board members, again, kind of back to the friends, neighbors, colleagues, and work environments, when we do that and they don't have a good experience in terms of they're not really volunteering their time for what they truly believe in, what they truly want to accomplish in terms of how they spend their time, then those folks usually leave. And that's why we find many nonprofit organizations kind of in flux of the job of recruiting new members is hard. We tend to take the easy route. And then when we get someone to say yes, they tend not to stay because it doesn't exactly match what their needs are, or it's not fulfilling. And when we stay in a bubble like that, it usually does not mean good things for our nonprofit organizations and organizations that are mission based. Okay, so then when we think about volunteer leaders, how should we think about them? And this is just from a variety of research that things that tend to stick out or tend to be consistent when we look at this stuff. And so what we found is that volunteer leaders tend to perform a lot of different functions. We can assume that those things that they engage in are more managerial or leadership type functions, and they should be. If you ask someone to spend their time as a board member, to the next point where we reference that they tend not to be doing the work, well, we certainly see examples, and this might be a little bit different for you, is that when we recruit board members, again, in more traditional environments, we usually want them to stay away from some of the delivery of services at nonprofit organizations and focus more on what's going on from a managerial and a leadership function. The board members or volunteer members are supposed to, or we find them facilitating the ability of others. So how they work with others to make sure that everybody's up to par, sharing the work and working together tends to facilitate those abilities that others have. We'll talk a little bit more about that one when I get to the point of talking about these group processes that maybe we should take on that can help in terms of forwarding our mission at a variety of nonprofit organizations. Certainly something that, again, we'll talk about a little bit more in detail has to do with the setting direction and guiding objectives at these organizations, these mission-based organizations. And of course, planning and decision-making. Again, we'll talk a little bit more in detail about all of these pieces as we get just a little bit further into our presentation today. So board members, this member engagement, member engagement is every organization, what I would say is going to define this a little bit different. And there's not a lot of consistency around what engagement actually means, but we know usually what we see, and when I say usually what we see, I'm just referring to research studies, academic literature, any other scholarly type literature that's available for us to review. Member engagement tends to reveal itself when you see organizations that have volunteer members, volunteer board members who are prepared for meetings. So they've reviewed the information that's went out to them in advance for preparation of their meetings when they come together, and that they can speak to what are the important agenda items before they walk through the door and attend their board meeting in person, that they're actively engaged. You don't just see them at the board meetings on the day of those board meetings when they occur, whether it be once a month or every other month. Whatever the structure is for coming together, but they're actively engaged outside of board meetings. And that kind of goes to, the work really happens on boards outside of board meetings. So that could be in committee structures is mostly how we see that. That they've demonstrated commitment and involvement. It just kind of goes back to that level of engagement. One way we used to look at things from how board members are performing, just kind of back to that point of they're not just showing up on the days of our board meetings. Did they attend a certain event that we held? Did they spend time cultivating relationships on behalf of our organization out in the community in the name of opening up doors for those that for organizations to advance, that they're meeting with people in the community to tell them about the good work that they're involved in the name of trying to get others excited or involved in our organization. We tend to see quite a bit of that when we think about fundraising at organizations. I think is where that point specifically kind of comes from. And then if you're prepared for meetings and you attend those meetings and you're actively engaged in a variety of ways, then those tend to be the individuals that can tend to provide more strategic contributions as to what is the organization thinking about long term, or we really need to plan for a specific thing on the horizon that might say negatively affect our organization, or something that would be considered an opportunity that the organization can take advantage of as well too. So those more high-level strategic contributions that you would expect of board members in those formal roles when they're prepared for meetings, they've read the material, they're actively engaged in other things that the organization has going on, and they advocate for the organization outside of those board meetings and committee meetings out in the communities where these organizations are involved in. Okay, so again, just kind of back to the academic literature, it's pretty clear, or there's certainly some consistency around that the right leaders tend to translate to high performance at organizations. And so when we see nonprofit organizations who have the right volunteer leaders at their organization, I don't want to say in every case, but we definitely consistency and that they also are organizations that you look to that have a consistency and performing well in the communities that they serve. And so if that's what we want, how do we get that in terms of having the right leaders at the table? So just back to that recruitment process so that I can put some emphasis there. And, I say all of this is, regardless of, where you might be at, if you're doing a good job and you feel good about the volunteer board members that you have, kudos to you. But I would also say that even if you say you don't have it right, don't panic, don't worry, because we work with all sizes of organizations. And I can tell you that this is a tough one for nonprofits, kind of based on some of the things that I mentioned a little earlier. It's really hard to get this right unless you stop and really think about, okay, who do we really need? And are we open and willing to go outside of what might be considered a normal process? So board recruitment can get really formal. I'm not sure that I want to advocate for this type of process to get really formal for you all and the type of organization that you all have. But what I would recommend is just to stop and think about um, I, who do we truly need for what we're trying to accomplish? And I can't sit here today and say, I'm fully aware of what you're trying to accomplish as an organization. I imagine that that's a variety of things and all over the place with regard to the respective communities that I saw that joined us today. So whatever those things are specific and relative to your particular communities is just to really stop and think about, um, plan around, spend some of your board meeting time. Again, I'm going more to traditional practices here, but whatever those things are for your communities, what are the needs that you have in those areas that you serve in? And then if you can spend some of your time of, what are you trying to accomplish? What are our real needs in our communities? I imagine some of you all, the needs are the same. I imagine some of you all, they're very different related to the communities that you serve in. But then from there, once you've done that, let's just say when you come together, you've determined what those needs are. And then can you, on some level, match or identify or cultivate people and then eventually nominate folks to come onto your board based on this list, if you will, of needs that you've determined in your community. And then from that point, selecting who those board members are. Now, there's a whole lot in between just in terms of you might be able to select folks, but it doesn't necessarily mean that those are folks that will join your organization just because you've determined your needs, you've identified them, you've cultivated them in a way in the direction of they might want to help you with your mission, and then they eventually get nominated for a spot and selecting. There's a lot that kind of goes with that. I'm not sure that we will get a whole bunch into that, but I'll certainly just put some emphasis there, is that it takes some work once we go beyond friends, colleagues, co-workers to get folks to say yes to our organization. And with it being that type of that hard of work, that's when we tend to kind of go back to some old habits in terms of this recruitment and selection process that we have at nonprofit organizations. So just to give some nuts and bolts around, okay, well, what might that look like? And I think last time we did this as well. I'll share this slide deck so that you have this information in front of you that you can go back to as a resource after the session today. I'll certainly share this out. But if you wanted to get really formal, what might that look like? And it would start with, as I alluded to a little earlier, your needs. And so, this is irrespective of, how large you are as a group or how small you are as a group. I get the sense that anyone can still do this. And one of the things that I've said for a long time that I like to always mention to a variety of groups is, and again, I'm not sure exactly how this plays with your organization, but many times I've had the opportunity to work with small nonprofits, let's just say 3 people. And then when we get into something like this, I've had the same conversation with a variety of nonprofit organizations when we start talking about our need. And as soon as you say appoint a committee, and then someone will raise their hand and say, well, it's only 3 of us. Or our board is only, a really small size. One of the things that I used to say is people don't have to occupy a board slot to advocate for or be engaged in your organization. And so some volunteers could just simply be a volunteer outside of your board that might help you on a committee, but they don't necessarily have to have this formal board slot. So that goes to the point of what are your needs? Let's identify and appoint a committee. That committee is likely ran or led by someone who is on the board, but everyone on that committee does not have to have a formal board slot. Again, that's the way that I usually try to position that with smaller nonprofit organizations that have smaller boards and feel like if they can't fulfill a committee, that the process can't move forward, where you don't absolutely need board members for that. With your needs, again, discussing what those are, what competencies do you need, and what might representation look like. An interest form, where do you start? Make a list. So what is that list of needs that you have, and what might those interests be when you start first thinking about how do we get down the road with the recruitment process? And then, through your bylaws, what does it say in terms of the number of people that you can actually have on your board, say on a committee? So just to make sure that folks are aware of confirming the number of seats that are available before you get really good at this and you get a lot of people that want to be involved with you. And then from there, from needs to recruitment, that you communicate what your needs are to people. That this is something where you have to be, really transparent in terms of, how do you communicate what your actual needs are, what people will be doing on behalf of your mission, so that what we see here is that again, this kind of goes back to the comment that I'm trying to put some emphasis on of recruiting friends, colleagues, and coworkers. They get on a board and then they say, I did this, because, I consider you a friend. I wanted to help you out, but that's not really what I thought I was going to be doing. And we usually see this a lot with fundraising. So some folks get, again, I'm going back to more, a traditional sense of who we normally work with, but with regard to fundraising, it's pretty common that we hear board members say, I wasn't recruited to do fundraising, and now you're telling me that we have to do fundraising. And so, again, just the point here is making sure that we're transparent around what our actual needs are. In terms of those applications, that's, part of that formal process. And I'm not sure what your applications look like, but making sure that you get folks to fill out some information with regard to why might they be interested in joining your organization. And then having some process where you compile and screen applications against whatever those criteria are that you all have. And then on the selection piece, um, you're talking amongst one another just in terms of getting input and discussing candidates, that metrics that you have for some sort of scoring system. So, what are the needs that you have? Are you looking for gender? Are you looking for certain skills? I kind of mentioned the legal piece, the fundraising piece, if you need a new building, real estate expertise. If you're lacking someone that has a financial background or a finance background, to make sure you can keep those systems in place. What or how are you going to weight and score the folks that you have on there? And I'm seeing it's popping up occasionally, some of the questions that you all have. I can't say that I've been able to keep up or read those, but I just want to acknowledge that we'll certainly, when we get to the end, we'll try to make sure that we respond to some of those questions that you have. But to keep going on selection, we see that scoring and ranking candidates, conducting interviews when you've kind of got your list down to a point to where those are the folks that you feel comfortable that you want to ask to join you, and then prioritizing what that list might be, presenting those candidates, and then deciding on if that's someone that you want to join you or not, and to have a vote on it through a balloting system. So again, we'll share this information with you, but this is just one way to think about how might you get through that process of recruiting. uh, Going through this process of what have we identified, and what do we know about recruitment processes at nonprofit organizations. um, Other notes that have come from some of those research processes is that only 30 to 40% of boards have said they think that they do all of those aspects well, that we just went through. Um, Talked about the volunteer committees. Well, actually having committees is a thing. So most nonprofit boards have committees, and it's well documented that that's how or where work gets done outside of board members. As I alluded to a little earlier, that this is fairly thoughtful work when you put in a process like how are we going to recruit people that really represents the need that we have as an organization. It's not by any means simple. It's fairly difficult when you say this is a process that we're going to implement, and this is a process that we're going to follow, and this is a process that we hold one another accountable on. Is that's how we're going to go about our business to make sure that we have high level, high functioning board that gets stuff done in the name of performance that increases or advances who we are as an organization, especially with mission based work. Diversity is always a consideration. About half have a position description. So only 50% of organizations, when they go out to recruit board members, actually have a description as to what their role would be. And this is something that I'm certainly an advocate for. That's when we get into, I was recruited, I didn't know about this, and then it ends up not being a good match. People get turned off by it and eventually they leave. That's what the position description kind of helps. And then if things change at an organization, you can clearly have those conversations to say, we know we recruited you along a description that looked like this. This can apply to anyone's job, profession, whatever it might be. But then at least you can go back to having a conversation around this is a shift that we're going through as an organization. And what do you think about continuing to serve with us? Um, Again, 50% or approximately anyways, determine half of them determine what their real needs are at their organization. So not to say that it's tough to determine what those needs are. It's just really all about stopping and saying, this is what we have determined our needs to be, and this is how we're going to go out and recruit volunteer board members. The same would apply for positions that organizations are trying to put in place, paid positions that organizations attempt to put in place. And then there's some executive or staff involvement. So I'm mostly talking about in a more traditional sense, nonprofit organization, in terms of recruiting new members. Usually that's a board function to go out and recruit new board members. If there's a paid staff person, there's some mixed results in terms of how many executive directors are actually engaged in that process. Okay, so why does all of that matter? We just kind of go to, leaders who know what they want. They're supposed to do more and are likely to fulfill those functions. So kind of back to the position description, if you will, or a transparent conversation about what's going on at your particular organization or your particular chapter. Just as sure as people know what it is you want them to do, they're more likely to fulfill those functions in terms of recruiting board members or volunteers to your organization. Just as a reminder, you want to try to match abilities with need at the organization. That helps the engagement of folks being involved and being around at your organizations. And then the purpose of the group is more likely to be clear when you collectively have a system like that recruits or helps you to recruit volunteers to your organizations. And so, with that said, what do you do with them once they're there? So leadership responsibilities. So this is an old model that I used to work on. Is if somebody asks you the question, what are the responsibilities that we have as an organization? And again, just to note that this is going to be traditional to more of our more charitable type organizations. And for you, what I would ask you to do is just to think about what this mix might look like for you as volunteer board members. So we know that we want our volunteer board members at more charitable organizations to spend about 25% of their time thinking about strategic planning, 25% of their time related to governance issues. And when I say governance, I tend to think about, the fiscal and legal responsibilities that nonprofit organizations have. And of course, a big thing, I'm sure, you all sit on boards as well too, that money is a big issue. So they used to say we want board members to spend about 50% of their time thinking about how to fundraise. Now, I've updated this model a bit, and I think it hopefully came out in some of the information that we've already kind of went through is to remember that those group processes are highly important. How boards interact as a group is the way that we've recently kind of complemented this pie chart here. So instead of 50% of your time in fundraising, let's just say it was 30% of your time, and then another 20% of your time spent focus on what are those group processes that we should be engaged with as a board. Just that's how much emphasis is being put on things that we do as a group. How do we maintain a level of cohesiveness that makes sure that our organization is thriving? And that's showing up at meetings, attending events together, spending time planning as a group for what's on the horizon for our organization. So those group processes is one way that I would certainly update this. But I wanted to kind of show you this just as a sample, because I'm not exactly sure where you would go with this, but just one way to think about on a daily basis, fairly routine, how am I spending my time as a volunteer, and what does that mean for our specific organization? I wouldn't be able to comment on the particulars of what you all are engaged in, but just to show as a sample, don't overthink it. What are the top 3, 4 things that we need to be involved in as board members? So to get into governance, so I think one of the questions that was asked is, could we provide what a sample a strategic plan might look like? Could we provide what a board retreat might look like. What I would say to you is, without getting into a lot of detail, especially for a session like today, is just to remind those of you all who are attending, is not to overthink something like this. So in a traditional nonprofit organization, if I was to go kind of off the top, um, what needs to be addressed within a strategic plan? Well, first let's talk about a board retreat. So governance, let's go to governance. So at any board retreat, what we would hope is that organizations are really thinking about what are those governance issues that as board members we have a primary responsibility for. And instead of a template of what that might look like, here's some questions I think that kind of conceptualize what types of things would be covered at a planning retreat for a nonprofit organization. And one of the things that we would go to, of course, is that at a planning retreat, we would hope that boards would review and approve what their financial goals are, and also what their annual budget is, and that budget that is that reflects what the priorities are at your organization. So we go back to, we've identified what our needs are within or at a board retreat. Hopefully there would be some real time kind of put into, here's our financial goals, here's our annual budget, and our budget reflects what we've identified as our priorities for years 1, 2, and 3, or the next 1, 2, and 3 years at your organization. Um, does the board effectively monitor the financial health with an eye toward early identification of problems? So the other thing that you would see at a board retreat would really be kind of some detail or digging into where are our finances at our organization? What type of income do we have? What is our burn rate on a monthly basis? What do we have in terms of money that we have to the side to help us weather tough times? What do we know we have in terms of, if you have paid positions, how we afford that? Are grants being managed the way that they need to be? Going through all of those processes along with the executive in some cases that are there to kind of help walk through some of those particulars. Um, an audit, if there were an audit completed at your organization from one year to the next, was there anything that needed to be discussed that was an exemption from your auditor that has either been discussed or not discussed? That would certainly be one time to do it, where we know from the retreats that you have that you get folks that actually show up to those retreats. So you have full input from the majority of your board to discuss things like this. And so on to financial management practices, that your 990s are up to date and publicly available, that you have risk management plans that's managed with insurance, to the executive, making sure that the insurance is up to date, and that you have policies and procedures, which would be another piece that would almost be kind of a separate piece, to make sure that all your policies and procedures are kind of up to date at your organization. And then just generally speaking, that at those retreats, you can kind of say to yourself that you're providing the type of ethical and legal oversight that's mandated by the type of organization that you are leading, if you will. And those are some others around conflict of interest policies and whistleblower things like that. So to kind of keep going, conversations around, do you feel like you have a strong partnership with whoever the executive or CEO of your organization? So performance is reviewed at these types of retreats. So without having an executive, you all are all volunteers. It's been a question at nonprofit organizations is, how hard should you go in evaluating the performance of volunteers? And so we get a lot of back and forth with that one. But what I would say is, especially for a group like yours, all being volunteers, performance is an issue. How are you spending your time? Is the work serious? how do you grade yourself in terms of performance over the last year? And then, of course, something else that we'll talk about toward the end is succession planning in a little bit more detail, but just to make sure that we address what succession planning looks like, and are there emergency plans in place? You know, where would you go to? What would you do if all 4 volunteers at whatever chapter decided to leave all at once, and the person who was the chair or the leader in that area knew exactly what to do or wasn't sure what to do and had to scramble a bit? Um, Bylaws of your organization, reviewing those at retreats. Is the size and diversity of the board appropriate for fundraising? Again, that one might not apply as much, but something that organizations would certainly talk about. We've talked about this on what leader competencies are necessary and what practices are in place to select officers. We talked about some of that with the recruitment and selection process. Um, One that I liked is, or that I like is the board attendance policy. You know, what type of attendance policy do you have? This kind of goes to the performance piece, and we've seen boards kind of go back and forth with this one. Okay, a board member doesn't show up. Whose responsibility is it to say something? What do your bylaws say? If they miss 3 meetings, they can't be on the board any longer. Okay, who says something? Who puts that in force? Who enforces that? We see a lot of nonprofit organizations kind of let that go. And then in the end, there's someone that they have on their board who isn't contributing to the organization. They don't show up. Who eventually says something? And then if you ask yourself the question, do strategic discussions take place at every board meeting? And if not, at your retreat, what might that look like as you go forward from one year to the next when you get into a session like that? Okay, and again, instead of getting too far into here's a template for your strategic planning, and without knowing all of those details of your particular organization, really what a strategic plan has to do of what are those operational pieces that are part of your organization. So if I went to a traditional nonprofit organization, you have programs. So what's our service delivering? What services are we are delivering in our respective communities? What are we doing in relation to fundraising? What are we doing in relation to our financial operation? What are we doing in relation to marketing at our organization? I would call that a strategic plan that has a column for programs, a column for fundraising, a column for marketing, and then it gets into the details of what your goals and aspirations are around any of those areas. And then down from that, what are the objectives in any of those areas? And then how do you get there? Who's responsible for it? What timeline? Things like that. So instead of confusing, I'll just give some tips of what I've seen in relation to strategic plans at organization. But this is a board process that you've taken the lead to establish what that plan might look like. Is it comprehensive, and does it address, again, just what I went to, all aspects of your operations? In partnership with the executive director, have you identified goals, indicators, and measures of success? Who's responsible for it? On what timeline? And what are the objectives that we're looking for? What does success mean? When you put a strategic plan in place, the question that I've asked here is that it's aligned with what? Is it some broader goal that you're trying to tackle in the state of Texas? And over in Spring, you've identified to what extent that you need to accomplish in Spring's demographic area. Over in North Texas, what's your responsibility or your piece of the pie with regard to a strategic plan that you put in place? Other things that we get into is the board is clear on the authority of the CEO and their limits in decision making. in partnership with the executive director or CEO, you have clear priorities that you've outlined within your strategic plan. And then, of course, what do you use in terms of a scorecard to monitor performance of your strategic plan? The thing that I really like about strategic plans is it's really an agreement. Once you put one in place, what I believe what that does for an organization is it gives the executive director or CEO of that nonprofit to say, no, wait a minute, this is what we're working on. But it also gives the board a way to manage the executive director and CEO to say, no, that's not a good idea because we're going to focus our time according to what we've outlined and approved in our strategic plan. So in partnership with one another, it really keeps us all on track in terms of those things that we've agreed to, and it helps us to stay within the parameters of what we believe is going to lead to success for our organizations. Okay. I know we're getting close on time. I certainly have time to respond to questions, so I'm not rushing, but I think we're toward the back end of, we're going to, shift into thinking about what do we mean by flexible leadership, or one approach or one leadership model that we can use when we start thinking about being flexible or being adaptive as a leader. And for that, I tend to go to situational leadership approach. The situational model, again, this has been around since the 70s or 1970s. And then what it challenges folks to do is to think about leadership in a variety of situations, and that different situations demand different types of leadership styles. And so what it says is, to be effective, leaders should have the ability to adapt to the demands of a situation at hand. But the caveat here is the situations that this model primarily approaches is the relationship between leaders and followers with respect to followers' competency levels and their commitment levels, commitment to whatever mission it is that you all are both working for or on behalf of. And what this model tries to position is that skill level and motivations of employees, other board members, if you will, other volunteers, if you will, that skill level and motivations basically vary over time. And so just to kind of give you a graphic of, what that looks like is what this model kind of assumes is, let's just say you all have to recruit new members, and you have new members kind of coming in all the time. And if you start down where it says S1 in the lower right-hand quadrant, this is someone, if you think about this, a new board member walks into your organization, and they might be highly motivated because it's a new role for them, but at the same time, they're not exactly sure what to do because they're new to the organization. And so what this model says is that, at that point in time as a leader, we should be more instruction focused and kind of supervise carefully, if you will. And then as they go up from there, they get a little bit more competencies, but then they've lost a little bit of that initial motivation that was there in joining your organization. And so as a leader, we want to make sure that we can encourage and still continue to supervise, if you will. Then they get a little bit further into the organization. And then at that point, you can, as a leader, lay back a little bit, because at that point, you really want to be more supportive in your approach. So you want to empower them, provide recognition, the social support that goes with the relationships that we have at work. And then to try to get them over to, or our responsibility as a leader is to try to get them over to where we can delegate. And this is where they've been at the organization a while. Trust is fully developed. Our job at that point is to get out of the way and let them blossom. Again, I know we're talking about volunteers, but this is really more of a relationship between leaders and employees, leaders and followers, and in a work environment. And take whatever you can with regard to how you're set up with regard to your volunteer model as board members. So just continuing from that graph, if we ask ourselves, what are directive type behaviors when folks just come to our organization? And so again, we talked about, giving direction, establishing goals, setting timelines, defining what those roles are, and determining methods of evaluation. Then from there, once they grow in the organization, where we're okay with as leaders, where they're asking for light input, that they're okay solving problems, that we want to make sure that at that point, instead of directing and telling them what to do, that we're also open to listening to ideas that they have, praising and sharing information about oneself in the name of that social relationship that we likely have with employees and also with volunteers at the organizations that we serve as board members with. So this model also assumes that that one thing we want to do is, as leaders, we want to focus on the development of followers. And again, the only way that I can kind of transition this into your environment again is the new board member who is coming to your organization, and they've been recruited. You've told them about the organization, but one way or the other, they're starting as a new board member with you. And so the quadrants that we have here is, development level 1, development level 2, development level 3, development level 4. We've kind of been through this already, but the best way, I shouldn't say maybe the best way, but one way that I describe it is anyone who comes to our organization, especially as an employee, they could be a superstar. They have the degrees, they have the work experience, but with regard to the specifics of what you're trying to accomplish, we know that there's some low competence there. But at the same time, at just entering our process, there's some high commitment all the way over to our responsibility, kind of based on the relationship that we have, is that we want to get them to where they have a high level of competence over to the quadrant of development level 4. And we know that they've stuck around. They have high commitment to our mission. Our job is to get them from D1 to D4. And so let's see here. I've kind of been through some of the behaviors, but just to give examples, if we take the first quadrant of directing, if we think about new employees or new volunteers, again, I've already talked about how common it might be for them to possess some excitement. And the reason why we watch at that point is because there might be some mistakes that they make kind of due to a lack of understanding of what the volunteer role is or what the job requirement is. And then when we think about existing employees, those that have been around for a while, let's say they're doing something new in terms of a long-term employee or a long-term volunteer that's been at your organization. But then when you implement something new, many times we revert back to, regardless of how many years of experience that we have, we revert back to some lower levels of competencies. So as leaders, we have to watch for these new things that we're doing, even with folks that have been around for a while. With regard to coaching, we know that those volunteer board members or employees that have 6 months worth of experience with us, that they've advanced some with regard to their competencies, and we need to watch to make sure that they're ready to take on some of those new responsibilities and let them have whatever those responsibilities are. With supporting, again, just a word there, what we should look for as leaders is that even though employees might be competent, but they occasionally seek input on tasks, to be okay with letting them go. It's okay to have that relationship to where it's okay for them to come to us for guidance, but to remember that we really want to try to get them over to that fully developed level, and making sure that the things that they approach us with, that we can support those things and let them keep growing. And then over to delegating, where they've made it over to, or you've coached them over to development level 4. Because this is, typically when they have years of experience and their motivation and accomplishment or motivation for accomplishment continues to persist. They take on ownership for getting the job done. At the end of the day, it's important to them. So that's when we truly, as leaders, can say, go do this, delegate to them, and you have some trust, you have confidence that they're going to do just that because the work is truly important to them. Just in terms of some quick things for what to consider when evaluating, again, I'm talking about employees, but when we think about how do you, as let's just say someone who's chairing your board and thinking about other board members, just some things to kind of keep in mind are, how complex are the goals that you're working on? Do the folks that you're working with or leading, do they have or possess the required skills to do what it is you're trying to accomplish or those goals that you have? And have you or do you have the sense that those other board members that you're working with, that they have a desire to see it go through to the end? Just some quick notes on succession planning. This research is a little outdated, but the last thing that I have was from 2015 on succession planning, and that this was the number one thing that one organizational concern expressed by boards and CEOs have to do with succession planning. It's a big thing in the nonprofit world of where are future leaders going to come from. And what we know about succession planning is that it's mentioned twice as often as the next concern, and only 30% of C-level roles in the nonprofit sector are filled by internal promotions. 30% is half of those promotions that they see internally in for-profit organizations. Again, this goes back to 2015, but it's the latest that I have. And the above rate does not vary in the nonprofit sector, does not vary by size of the organization. Only 30% of management type roles in nonprofits are filled by an internal promotion, and that's regardless of the size of nonprofit organizations. The way that we think about in the nonprofit sector has to do with, we believe that nonprofit CEOs and boards kind of miss the answer to succession planning. It's right under their noses. And usually that's employees that are already there. We coined them, I guess, as employees of promise. And they tend to be frustrated at the lack of opportunities and mentoring. And that includes even CEOs and executive directors at nonprofit organizations. And that boards, management teams, funders, and donors have the power to change that dynamic. It's really looking internal. When we think about succession planning in the nonprofit sector, we've talked about it as a leadership development deficit, that there is, we're not grooming, we're not coaching, we're not lifting up the people that are already inside of our organizations. And those implications include a financial cost, a productivity cost. It undermines effectiveness at our organizations, and it hampers the ability to address social and economic inequities at organizations. I think that's all that I have today. Let's see here. I'd be happy to jump back on and see if there's, it looks like there was a few questions anyways.
Yeah, Kenny, there were lots of great questions.
Okay.
One before we get started into some of the content is about sharing your slides. I believe you said you were willing to, and as a reminder,
Absolutely.
we'll have this recording up on our website
Sure.
with those slides later today. Thank you.
Sure, absolutely. Be happy to.
Michelle, you've got some questions that you've been watching and answering. You want to ask Kenny?
The biggest question we have, Kenny, is everyone's eager for your slides. So you have shared those with us.
Good
We'll
enough.
post
That's
that.
That's an easy one.
Check. We'll post that with on the website with the webinar recording later. And so that'll be available for everyone to get there. I'm not sure where to start. Some people asked about, let's see. When should a chapter begin focusing on identifying and cultivating potential new board members? And
Yep.
then I'll give you the second part of that question. Secondly, what do you see as a typical commitment of a volunteer serving in a leadership role in terms of number of years?
When the organizations that we work with, if you've made it to a point as an organization where you're prioritizing board recruitment, that process that we just spoke about, it really never stops. But you might have identified in your bylaws, not that you have to, but you may have identified there's twice a year when we vote on new board members, or there's once a year that we vote on new board members. We talked about board retreats. Usually that's an annual thing. Board retreats we tend to see at those retreats that where folks bring on new members. Some do it, have some flexibility in their bylaws to bring folks in whenever needed because folks leave. So I think that's something that's, discretionary. But once you define something that works for you, just kind of stick to whatever those rules say so that that all of that process can be captured in your organization minutes. So once you approve something, so that would be a strategic level conversation at a board meeting. If you don't have something like that already, that we're going to do it twice a year, fall, spring. We vote on them in the summer, or we, are flexible kind of based on someone might leave and we need to be open in that process, or we can always replace one person. So that one's really, discretionary based on what you define as how you want to do that. And just a quick reminder on the second piece of that question.
You find it again. It was, what do you see as the typical commitment of a volunteer serving in a leadership role in terms of the number of years?
Typical, I would say a minimum of 2, but I probably see more 3-year commitments. 2, especially in a leadership role. I mean, I'm serving as a board chair of an organization. That year goes by really fast. There's things that I want to correct in my second year, and 2 years is a pretty quick out, I believe. But if you want to have some continuity, the way that I've seen organizations structured is mostly around 2 years for smaller organization. Those that are a bit more mature, I've seen 3 years as an indicator that things are going well. We stay in place for 3 years, and you have some consistency, a track record of those that have stayed in place for that period of time. I think a year is too quick. If you're smaller and just kind of trying to get a hold on things, I would say 2 years is fine.
So another question, what suggestions do you have, what additional suggestions do you have to turn kind of the sense of being a board or committee, being on a board or committee as something, being looked at as something that you have to do versus making it something that you have a lot of pride in doing, or having someone step up and say, like, the thing we want to avoid is having someone say, well, no one else will do it, so I'll step up. Like, how do we make these positions, I think that the root of the question there is how do we make these positions more sought after, and it being a sense of pride in serving in these roles?
Yeah, I think that goes to the group processes piece that I touched on, but I didn't go really far with that. If you so any of your chapters, those that are still here on the session today, for any of you all, what I would think about or take a hard look at is what are those things that we do as a group. That could be when we meet. That can be when we are putting our hands in the dirt. That could be for some event that we show up together for. That could be for something else that we're supporting in the community. But the way I would respond is don't underplay. Take a hard look at what are those things that you all do as a group, or you want to get better as better at as a group. And uh, the reason I believe, anyways, while we're seeing those group processes stick out more and more with regard to success at nonprofit organizations, is think about it. Um, when we have good social relationships in our neighborhoods, when we have good social relationships, generally speaking, at work, that family environment. When boards do, there's something to it. I can't explain it, but there's something to, as a group, we get along and we do things together. If you can build on that, that cohesiveness changes something about nonprofit organizations and the way that they operate. So a starting point for me would be, let's start doing more social type things together. And a leader can almost sit back and watch how good those things are going and then build on it, because others in a community will see it as well too, and then utilize that to build on. Hey, when we come together, people want to be together. People want to vote and take action on things. We want to go out in whatever those activities are. I wish I was a little bit more versed on, when you go out and plant things, or educational workshops that are really kind of in the field, when you do things together, and when the community takes notice, and it just kind of spins a bit if you can get that piece right.
The power of gathering. Yeah.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
So, Kenny, we're a little bit over time for
Mhm.
our allotted time this morning or this afternoon, and I have one last question for you. Someone asked in the chat, what other resources does your organization provide, or can they provide?
Yeah, most everything that we've talked about today, we're certainly not trying to be all things with regard to nonprofit stuff, but outreach and professional development, we have, though I didn't go over them in any real detail. Anyone who's looking for training opportunities around, generally, or I call it a generalist type certificate in nonprofit leadership. Anyone who wants to know more about fundraising, the leadership theory. I'm a leadership theory person here at the school. Dr. Will Brown is a board governance. So everything that we talked about today, especially the board stuff, we have a well tenured senior scholar here at the school that is really familiar and well published on the board governance stuff here at our center. Diversity and social justice. I've been doing a lot more work kind of in that space again, even though I'm a leadership guy. More and more, what I've been finding is diversity, equity, and inclusion kind of walks side by side with leadership issues at organizations. So those are the types of resources that we have. We have a half day board session, roles and responsibilities, and we do a 2 day, I believe, Mary Pearl, that's the one that you attended,
That's the one
is
that
our
I attended.
leadership and public service program, which is a 2 day in residence program here. And we're always open to talking about custom stuff, but we clearly, kind of tell people when that's out of our expertise or our realm of doing. But we're happy to highlight the stuff that we do have. And I imagine with the presentation, you all could share, or we're easy to find online as well too. So.
Yeah, and Kenny, y'all also have a fantastic network of resources. So if you're not able to provide that, you can certainly connect our folks with folks who can provide those types of services, events, information as well. I've taken the 2 day course, the certificate program, and participated in some of y'all's one-off events, and always fantastic. The webinar series that you guys have hosted is a great resource for kind of staying up on your skills for leadership in nonprofit service.
Yeah, I should definitely mention those. Thank you. As a reminder, our webinars, we usually do 3 an academic semester. And kind of back to what I mentioned, we do one on leadership, we do one on boards, and we do one on fundraising just about every academic semester. And we take a break over the summer with those, but those are open and free to the public.
Yep, wonderful. well, Kenny, to be aware of your time and the time of our Master Naturalist joining today, I think we're going to cut it off today at 20 minutes after. So thank you for all of the wealth of information that you've shared with our Master Naturalist, with us, especially as you've continued with our TMN Tuesday series twice now, and really helped to build that case for leadership development, succession planning, retreat planning, intentional recruitment, and that social camaraderie of the boards and the organization as a whole. So thank you so much. You are always welcome to any of our Master Naturalist events, annual meeting, conferences, any of that, or to come plant some plants with us. Tell
There
me
you go.
when you want to put your hands in dirt, and we've got a place for you.
Sounds fun. Yeah. No, if when I send that information to you, maybe we'll also do a follow-up for those who asked. It'd be a good way to just sign up for our newsletters and stuff like that, and we can keep you abreast of any and all of our opportunities. And
We'd be happy to
thank you
send
all
it.
for your time so much.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Kenny, and thank you to our Master Naturalists. We'll see you guys in 2023 with our TMN Tuesday event kicking off in January.
Thanks, y'all.
All right. Thanks so much.
Weird to say, see you next year.
No, take care.
Thank you.